Great. Well, thanks everyone. The objective here is to walk through the process that you would take to move an already spun up Ubuntu Linux server and to turn it into something that can run a website application. And the website application stack. Now, stack's something that is used to describe the set of technologies that run that server. That stack that we're going to use is a LAMP stack. You'll hear a LAMP stack talked about in a lot of circumstances. That describes the components that it's made of. So inside of a LAMP stack, the L stands for Linux, and you can see that we have the Linux as the underlying basic system. In order for Linux to talk externally to the larger environment, we're going to use something called Apache. Now, there are other options. There's something called Nginx, for example. And so you might see an Nginx server put in here. But since we're doing LAMP, we're going to stick with Apache. Then there is MySQL. Sometimes people say MySQL. And that's the database layer. That's where, in general, the information is stored. Databases are very good at keeping information organized, where you can insert information and you can extract information in a very structured environment. There are alternatives to MySQL. There's light versions, there's other versions of it. There are types of databases which are essentially a file system. So they have different schemas or structures that, that build them up. And then finally, on top, handling kind of bridging the two of them is PHP, Perl, or Python. We're going to be using PHP, which is an older language. It's a language that is really made for generating documents. It will do things where you can present HTML and then put a little clip in there to tell it to go and get some information from the SQL database. It will then generate the new HTML document with the included information from that database and hand it over to the Apache web service in order to make it available for somebody to see it online when they type in the specific web address. Now, we'll get into setting these up. Before I do that, were there any questions on that basic setup? I see there's one. Like triggering HTML to PHP to MySQL. Yes, so when the scripting language like PHP would generate a web page which might have forms on it, and inside that PHP that you've used to generate the form, it will have certain triggers that know to query the database once you've done certain actions on the web form. Now, we're not building a web application inside of this little session. We're just getting the platform set up. And there's lots of things to think about as you are taking data from users and having it instruct your server to do something. One of the rules is never trust the user because the user can do things like inject SQL. So that's an attack where if you had a form and there's a field there and you're just trusting that, like, hey, I'm going to have that information go into the go to my database to make this request. Well, they can actually write in the language that would the server, the database is expecting, and therefore say, rather than go get that data, they can say, hey, go get that data, then create a new table write a bunch of data to that new table or delete your entire database. So when you hear about people not escaping, people not sanitizing their scripts, these are terms where basically people over-trusted the user and allowed them to take over their database, which is a type of what hackers would do. So as a, we're not going to get into that, but just to know that exists. So I think without further ado, I'm going to run into how we go forward. So we're going to use Code Anywhere because it's a pretty quick way in order to spin up a blank Ubuntu server and work from that. Although the things that I'm doing in general should be completely, well, almost the same, sometimes between different versions of Ubuntu, depending on which one you're using, or you might have started with a different default distribution with some different packages. There might be some differences, but conceptually, it will be the same. So I'm going to do, call this demo web. And I'm going to be clicking blank development stack, and I'll click create. So this is building a container, same as installing an operating system. This one is just contained on a website and then delivered to me. It's disposable, so I'm going to delete this when we are done. And here it comes. All right. So in the case of this Code Anywhere, it's giving me a little background on what I have. I have 2 gigabytes of disk storage, 500 megabytes of RAM, and it's telling me that I have, if I'm going to have something available over HTTP, that it will be available at this website address. And when I go to this website address, demo admin, it's saying this container is inaccessible. There's nothing running here, and it gives me some instructions. So one of the steps we're going to take is we're going to run something on this. The other tab is our standard Linux prompt on console. If you are totally unfamiliar with console, MakeHaven does have some other videos that introduce you to some basic Linux concepts. What I'm going to do to start out is, before we set up anything, a blank Ubuntu installation may not have the most recent repositories. And remember, the repository is the place where all of the information is stored. So what we want to do is we want to update our local listing of where all the software is before we go get other pieces of software. So I'm going to do sudo, or super user do, sudo, and then I'm going to say apt, and because apt is the program that goes and gets other software from the repository, and I'm going to say update. And so what this is grabbing is the listing of where it can get all the most recent software. Now I'm going to try and install Apache. And if you remember, Apache is a thing that serves things to the web. In order to do that, I'm going to do super user do. And I'm going to say apt install, and then Apache, and then it's 2. That's just the name of the application. It's going to ask me, are we sure that I want to install all of these packages? Yep, I do. And I'll provide all these commands in order after the fact. So if you want to try practicing and following along to the video that I'll post, you can do so. All right, so we have Apache installed. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to just test to see what's going on with it. And it has there is a program that comes with Apache called Apache Controller. So I'm going to use that. So I'm going to go to sudo Apache, and the controller is ctl and then we're going to go config test. Okay. So it gives me a little error here. It says Apache 2 could not reliably determine the server's domain name using set the server name in the directive to suppress this message. All right, so this is not like a game changer message. It says syntax okay, but we're gonna fix it anyways because it introduces us to where our configuration files are and so on. You might be wondering, how do I know all these mysterious commands? Where are these coming from? Well, number one, they're coming from just searching the internet and seeing what one or two different people say. It's important to look at how different people solve the problem. Some people tend to go through overly complex methods or methods that aren't related to you. So it's good to find a couple of sources. I just Google Apache setup, Apache config, and look at what people have to say. So setting these things up for the first time, the best and biggest skill is really searching for how to do it and then deciphering what's relevant to you. And the only thing I can say is that it takes practice. There are a couple of things. So once we know that we have this Apache controller, for example, we can always use the internal manual, right? And so that tells us, what is this? What are the commands? And I can learn about what I can do with Apache controller: start, stop, status, restart, all of these various commands to control our web service that is running. And so we want to fix that issue that we had. And to do that, we are going to use Nano. Of course, Nano's not installed, but let's just see what happens because we're going to run into that. So I was going to do sudo nano, only one space, and then where the configuration file is in etc. And so the slash means it's going to the root, and inside the root is a folder called etc. And then it installed a subfolder called Apache 2. And I'm using tab to autocomplete to make these easier. And then there's a file called Apache 2 config. Apache 2 CONF. All right. So I am going directly from where I am to open this file. An alternate would have been to cd and then type in the etc/Apache 2, and then I could have listed all the files there, and then I could edit it. So maybe I'll do that as well. Oh, the problem that we were expecting. Sudo nano command not found. Well, let's go ahead and add nano. Sudo apt. I tend to use apt-get, install, and then nano. All right, so this installed our text editor called Nano. So I'm going to use the up keys on my keyboard. That's going to bring back this old command because I've already typed it. Why type twice? And it opens up Nano and our configuration file. So just to see, anything that has this little hash mark in front of it is not being read by the computer. Those are all comments or notes. These are just here to orient you and give you a sense of what's happening. So there's a lot of information on Apache. And then sometimes there'll be stuff that they've commented out that you can uncomment, that they've kind of pre-written, which are common settings that you might want to uncomment and make available. So when what is the computer reading? It's reading these ones, the ones without the hash marks. So host name lookup off is a setting. And there's various settings. The setting that I had read on the internet to resolve that problem was to create a server name. And we're going to create a server name by saying setting that variable that it had asked for, server, and then name. And we are now going to paste in, I'm going to use this. This should work. You could also use an IP address directly. So I'm putting in the where I expect this to be hosted. All right. And so now I'm going to press Control X. It's going to save changes. Yes. All right. So now we have saved changes. We've changed our configuration file on Apache. And that's a place that you'll end up going from time to time as you're troubleshooting and trying to figure out more problems. And I want to see if anything changed. So I'm going to go to sudo Apache control and then use the config test option. We've gotten rid of our error. It just says syntax okay. This is good. Let's see what happens when we refresh here. Still nothing. We're not yet running Apache, or we're not at least serving Apache. We can always look at top and see if it's in here. I don't actually see it yet, probably because it's not going. So what we were missing is configuring our firewall. So we are going to have to get the Ubuntu firewall. So Apache's there, but it's being blocked. We have to install firewall and then open it up. So we're going to go sudo apt get install, and then the firewall's name is Ubuntu FW or UFW, Ubuntu Firewall. All right. Now we've installed the firewall, and of course we can do man Ubuntu Firewall, and it's going to give us a bunch of instructions. Now, I tend to use the instructions I find from other people online, but it is good to be able to reference that official list. And we're going to do sudo Ubuntu Firewall, and we're going to say app list. So this is the list of apps that could potentially be cleared by the firewall. And the appropriate command for us is to clear the Apache full. So we're going to do sudo firewall and app info, and then all right. So those are the available applications actually, and what we just did is just looked at where it is cleared, and we can see the ports. So Apache 2, what's it running on? It's the next generation web service, and it is running on ports 80 and ports 443. Port 80 is the typical one that you're going to run on a web server. So we go back to our thing, still not working, but because of this, we're going to try and go to specify port 80. So and this is really just something from Code Anywhere, but you can put port 80 in front. So this means we're going to look at this server on port 80. Nope. What did I do? Oh, it probably can't take the HTTPS. So it's HTTP. So if you use HTTPS, it's trying to run it on a secure protocol, and it will have more hoops to jump through. We're just wanting to run HTTP. So I change this to port 80 dot, and then the name of our thing on Code Anywhere. Typically, if you're going to run your own server, you'll specify a port by doing the double dots and then typing that. And your exact configuration for how you're using a domain name and so on, that'll be different. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at this default page. So this is the hello world of Apache. We are serving something to the internet. It's saying it works, and it's giving us some information about Apache. Let's go back and take a look at where this is being served from. So I'm going to go ... I'm going to go back further. I'm going to go back, ls. We're going to go back further, see where we are each step. And now we're back to our root directory, the directory that shows all of the various components that make up the Linux operating system. And for whatever reason, the information that we're looking for is going to be inside the var. And inside of var, it's in this directory called www, World Wide Web. And then it's in the HTML. So this is the information that is being served out to the website. This is the default one. This is the file that we saw. So if I did nano and index.html, this is the document that we just read. So it's HTML and CSS and so on. So I am going to use some of our other Linux skills. I'm going to rename it by using the move command. I'm going to take that existing index file, and I'm going to rename it simply to old index.html. Oh, I don't have permission. Hopefully folks remember what to do there. And since we don't have permission, we're going to do sudo. All right. It doesn't give us a response, but if we do ls, we can see we have renamed our index file to this one. Now, if I go back this existing Apache page and I refresh, we now have the default behavior, which is it's going to show an index. It generates an index of everything in that directory. It's an important note that you shouldn't be putting anything in your World Wide Web folder which is sensitive, like passwords or other things that somebody could list and take advantage of your web service or your computer. So I could still get to this file here as a file within the web service, but I want to use put a new default web page up. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use nano again, and I'm just going to call it index.html. So Apache by default will just go to anything called index.html first and serve it. And now I'm going to build a very small HTML website. So I am going to go HTML, and then I'm going to say head. So this is going to say what's at the very beginning of the file. This defines things. And we're going to say title, and then my great site. And then we're going to close the title. So HTML tags are always open and closed. Then we're going to close the head because that's all the information. You would have lots of other information about your CSS files and so on in here normally. But we're going minimalist. And then in the body of the of the document. So this is what we're actually going to display. We're going to put a headline. So we're going to say H1, and this is a headline. And we're going to close that with the backward slash. And then we're going to open just a paragraph with P. This is a bunch of info. And we're going to close that. And then we are going to go ahead and close out the HTML. All right. Oh, I didn't do a sudo. It's a good lesson. I'm writing in this directory and it needs sudo. So I'm gonna have to exit, not save changes, run the same thing with sudo or super user do. All right. And I copied and pasted it. For some reason, it didn't keep the spacing I had, which doesn't actually matter other than it looks pretty. Okay, good enough. So I'm going to save, yes. All right. I'm going to go back and take a look at our page, see if this worked. Great. We've just built a website on Apache. This is my headline. This is the info, typos or mistypes, and all available on the web. But that is only the Apache side of this equation. We still need to figure out how to get our MySQL running on there. So what we're going to do is we're going to install MySQL. So that is sudo apt get, you could get any other one, install, and then this is MySQL, and then server. Do you want to install? Yep. It's going to do those things. All right, so now we need a password for the MySQL server. You really want to have something that people are not going to be able to guess from the web. You don't want something that's the name of your website. You don't want to use anything else. So I'm going to use something secret. It's making me type it again. Okay, it's doing its thing. All right. So now we have MySQL server installed on this server. You can access it using a login, which will bring you to a different prompt. We can do that with. So the way this breaks down, and this is MySQL. I'm calling a program. I'm logging in with user. The user name is root, and it's going to prompt me for a password. Again, we could look at this by finding it online or by typing man and then MySQL. So I'm going to enter my password. All right, I'm at my MySQL prompt. And inside the MySQL prompt, there's different commands. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say show and yeah, the capital letters and following things with a colon and all that is different. And it's because we're not now in the Linux console, or we're operating through it, but we're within a different program, MySQL itself. And you can see when I ran the show databases, there's some default databases. MySQL, in fact, uses databases to run itself in itself. So you can see there's databases related to the default stuff that MySQL needs. So now we're going to get out of MySQL, which I think is exit. Yeah. So we exit MySQL, and we are back at our prompt. We've got MySQL set up in a not super easy way to access, but let's get PHP installed, and then that will give us some additional tools. So we're going to go sudo. You get the pattern here. We're just installing things. Apt get install PHP. Do we want to install it? Yep. Okay, so PHP is installed, but we want to test what we installed here, and there is a way to do that. We can create a index file that will display the basic settings. You don't want to leave this up because people can take a look at it and find what version you're using and take advantage of it and so on. But we are going to create a file with nano index.php. And inside this, we are going to create a very small PHP statement. So we're going to do PHP, and then I'm going to say PHP info, and then it doesn't have anything there, semicolon, and then question mark. And this is a syntax for PHP, which again is beyond what we're talking about now, but just to know that you open and close PHP with these sort of these brackets, and that's, oh, I did it again. I didn't do super user do. Good lesson for everybody. So I'm going to copy that, exit this. We're going to do this again with sudo. I'm going to paste that in here. We're going to exit. Yep. All right. Well, let's go back to our server. I think it'll, because we have an index.html, I think it'll continue to load that. But if we go index.php, no, that's not what I wanted. Let me try getting rid of. I'm going to move the index.html out to yeah, sudo again. All right, so now I'm going to go back, and we're just going to use it as a regular index. Huh. Well, here's where I'm going to have to go off script. So what this should, I thought it was going to show us, was a readout of what all of our PHP settings were. I'm going to try just doing that again and pasting in from an example. So I'm going to remove index.php. We're going to need to use sudo again. So rm is remove, sudo. All right, we're going to ls. Yep, it's gone. We're going to go nano. We're going to go index.php. We're going to go sudo.nano.php. We're going to paste this in here. Exit, yes. All right, let me see if that. Oh, all right. Well, I'm going to continue. Not quite sure what part I missed. apt-get install PHP. So it should have done it. Yeah. Well, we'll keep going until we run into another problem, and then I will figure out what I did wrong there. So we're going to try and install a PHP-based application, which will help us to manage our database. So we're going to go sudo apt install php my admin. So this is a piece of software. You want to install it? Yep. So we're going to use Apache 2. Yes, I'm just going to enter. Do we want to use their default, or do we want to manually do a bunch of stuff? Let's go ahead and we'll just use their default. And then the application password. So I'm going to put in a secret password. Okay, so all of that installed, and we're still going to have to, well, let's go ahead and normally you would access my PHP from right here, and you would say PHP My Admin. Okay, it's not found. There's a problem. So this is where you do some Googling and you find out that you need to add to the Apache file to direct to where the program is. And the way we do that, let's this time navigate the other way. So I'm going to say cd, I'm going to go to the root, and then I'm going to go etc. So now we're in etc. You could, if I do ls to list everything, there's a whole bunch of programs. The program we're interested in is Apache. So I'm going to go cd Apache 2 ls. All right, we've got a bunch of things within Apache here, but what we're interested in is this Apache 2 config, which is listed. So I'm going to go nano Apache 2 config. We're back in our configuration file. I'm going to go all the way to the bottom. All the way down, lots of things. And now we're going to have to write in a new command. And I probably did not sudo this. Did not. There's a lesson to you. Remember sudo. Okay, we go down. And the command that I got from the internet was just include. And then what do we include? The etc. So where this is and then PHP My Admin. And then, so inside of PHP Admin, there's some additional configuration, and that is called apache.config. Great. So now this will, after it's loaded its configuration file, it will load the additional configuration file of that was included from the PHP install, or the my PHP admin. So I'm going to say yes. And in order for these things to be recognized, we're going to have to restart the Apache service. So I'm going to do sudo, and this is service, because Apache is running. This has nothing to do with the file system. This is to do with what's running. Apache 2, and I'm going to say restart. Okay, so that will have restarted Apache. And let's go back to our location where we were hoping to find this program. And we also have PHP listed. So there's something wrong with what I installed for our PHP is not running. Let me, I've had this problem before and I know it. But let's do an example of finding a problem. So what it is I haven't installed all of the extensions. So in order to figure out the problem, I'm going to look at the Ubuntu that we're using 1604, and then I'm going to say PHP showing code. Apache shows code instead of executing. And so here's that's the question. And it says, you must enable PHP. Check your mods enabled folder. Okay. So it seems like they're saying it's a configuration thing. Let's see what other folks have to say. I'll just ask this one here. Okay, so now this one's saying you've used that case, but not enabled. Okay, so why don't we try? So this is PHP, and then there's a connector, PHP MySQL. So I'll do that, and then I'm going to try this. It's already the full version. Gotcha. Try running this. Yeah, okay, so we're not running 7. So maybe one more. So what I'll do is I'm going to install a bunch of extensions in order to make sure I have all the ones. These are some typical extensions. So I'm going to do all right. Let's try that. And then phpgd. Already installed. Huh. All right. Well, folks, you have any questions for me as I'm going? I'm going to figure this out. Okay, so check our version here. Okay, so it is running. When I run PHP, that's there. We see we're running it. And we are running PHP version 7. Okay. HTTP PD. Well, let me take a look at that. What am I looking for? I'm looking for. Oh, that's a different file. All right. Well, let me jump back and take a pause here while we're going. So, are there any questions from folks? Wait, index files automatically populated. Okay, so that was a while ago. No questions. All right, hear nothing. I'm just gonna keep chugging away. So Okay, your Apaches. Hmm. Oh. We'll try it. And then Apache reload. Okay, so that fixed it. I guess it's an example of what you get a lot of are issues that come up, and then you go to the web to solve them. Now, I saw that this had a lot of votes on the thing. Stack Overflow is a pretty trusted repository of questions and answers. This has it's talking about my version of PHP, and it's talking about 61 people having voted it up. So I felt pretty secure in using it, and I could see that it didn't have, it didn't look like it had anything crazy that it was going to create a vulnerability. Really, if I was going to do this in a production environment, not just my little test, I would want to make sure I understood well what each of these commands was doing. So we now have PHP My Admin running. We should also have our example PHP that is our hello world for that running. So I'm going to go back to var www HTML. This is, remember, our web service directory, and I had renamed it to example. Oh, I probably deleted it. I'm going to recreate the, we're going to call it info.php. Then we're going to do super user do, and then nano. And I'm going to just drop in that that command for, there we go, save it. All right, now if all went well, I can actually, rather than going to here, I can go to info.php. That was what I was expecting. So this is PHP itself generating its diagnostic page, which has the various extensions and other elements that are within PHP. So this is a great diagnostic tool. You can run this and see what's going on with your PHP when you're troubleshooting, but not something you're generally making available to the world, since that it shows everything you've got. Now we're going to go back to, because I was talking about how it was difficult to manage our databases. So if we go to PHP My Admin, and now we're going to use root as username and then the password I set. All right. Now this is just a, there's I guess debate about whether or not this is better. Some folks will be command line only, but I think for a beginner, working within this sort of interface for your database is quite useful. So we can look at what databases we have. We could create a new database. So we're going to call this MakeHaven. We don't capital this. MakeHaven member. I'm just going to make it all one. Create. All right. So I have now this MakeHaven, and then I can create a table within this. And this is member names. And so I've just created a member names table, and I can say, Logan, oops, clicking things, Leor, Kate. So I can create tables and store data. You see, these are the data stored in this table, and I can add additional fields or columns and export and import. And again, now we've reached sort of the end of the setup process. So you can see how you can get PHP running, you see how you get Apache running, and you see how you get a database running. If you were to want to query something, we're not going to get into it, but this would be the type of thing you would do. So there is an extension within PHP called PDO, which is PHP Data Object. And so you would say, hey, connect to, using the PHP Data Object, connect to, in this case, it's localhost. So that's when you're running on your own computer rather than reaching to an external computer. This database name is wrong, but it's there for example. And then say, the username is this, the demo's that. Then we would go into, this is the condition of if there's an error. And then it says select from members or members list, whatever the name is. And you could say, what are you going to do? You're going to print out in HTML. You're going to print this out. And then for each record, this is a query in SQL, for each row where there's a name, it's going to print it. And then there's this, if there's an error condition as well. Now, this doesn't exactly line up to the naming scheme that we used in our database, but it gives you the idea of how then you would generate. So you would include this PHP essentially within the HTML. You would generate the whole thing inside of a PHP thing, but you'd produce that HTML, and then it would inject the queries from the database, and you would have a very simple web application. So we have now done all of our objectives within the hour. Can we go to questions that folks have about that stack or about how you might use it? So Jay asks, would PHP index.php point to another file? Well, your index.php or your PHP file in general would have information in it, and then it would include other things. So there's a command include, which we saw used earlier, and it essentially will pull in, and then you give like a file location. It will pull in that other file. And so you fill that PHP with conditionals. If this, then that. If this is happening, then include this. If this is happening, then include that. If this is happening, then list the things that are in this specific database. Query the database for all of these. And you use those basic structures to build up your web application. And of course, web application building is that's a different topic. But this is your starting foundation. Okay. What PHP code would go in head? So head is an HTML structure, and you're generally not going to, you might, if you're dynamically generating pages, for example, I guess you would have the title of that page. So you would have wherever your page titles were in your database, and you would tell it to pull from that database the name of whatever page it's serving, and it would drop in that title as text. So that would be that's the way you would use PHP in the head, and there might be other ways. Was the HTML file automatically populated into the directory from the code anywhere? I don't understand that question. So the Apache, when Apache was installed, it had it created that www/html directory. And within its configuration, the default setting is to look for index.html. And so that index.html file is the first thing it finds, and it will run it. It has a fallback to, if you don't find index.html, run index.php. And so that's why I was renaming things to get it out of the way. And you can change what it starts with from any of the inside of the configuration for Apache. So you could tell it to start whatever, but by convention, folks use, if you're just going to do HTML, you're going to use index.html. And if you're using PHP, you're going to use index.php. When you have things configured correctly, people do not see the contents of your PHP file that is executed rather than displayed as a file. And so you can use that to load your database and to do other things. I say this with some caution because there's a lot of, you really need to have an awareness of security. And it's fine at this point to, in a container like we have here, which is disposable, to try and figure out how those connections work and to load them and so on. But you're really going to want to understand the permissions, and you're going to want to understand where you're revealing data that could be used against you, and certainly before you did anything sensitive in a database. Is the PHP stuff hidden, or is it something like a shadow directory? So that's the way PHP runs. It's set to execute. You also have your file permissions. So you might remember from the previous session on Linux that we talked about those numbers. It was 777, and they stand for what does the owner get to do? What does the group get to do? What does the, those are what those numbers, and yeah, chmod is what determines different files accessibility on the web. So you want to make sure that you are configuring those correctly so that folks external to your service are not able to execute things they shouldn't, and are not able to read, and especially not write to anything that they shouldn't. And if I got into the the very specifics of the correct setup, I think that should really be a different session since we're at the end of our time. But they're findable by Googling, and they're conditional on what you're setting up and so on. Yeah, other questions? All right. I think we have covered our ground. We've taken the full hour. We did all of those things. We even had an example of troubleshooting on the fly, which is, in all honesty, probably the most important thing you'll do, is searching and finding solutions when errors come up. So thank you. Thank you all. I will end the recording.